is a matter that is of deep importance in Virginia, and I rise to talk about why we're here on a Sunday in January and the second day of the shutdown of the federal government. And when I conclude my speech, I'm going to seek unanimous consent for the reopening of the government for 3 days as we find a path forward. Mr. President, we're in a shutdown mode because the Republican majority has not prioritized completing a budget during the first year of the Trump administration. As the party in control of the White House, the Senate, and the House, there is a calendar set forth in law that we are supposed to follow. The President is supposed to present a budget to Congress in February. He didn't. The Houses are supposed to pass budgets in their committees in the spring. They didn't. The authorizing committees are supposed to write bills. Many of them did, but because they didn't have budget numbers to write them to, they were sort of marginal effect. And the appropriations committees are supposed to have funding bills ready and passed to start the fiscal year on October 1. The President was supposed to present a budget, and he didn't. The budget committees, controlled by Republicans, were supposed to pass a budget, and they didn't. And the appropriations committees are supposed to have bills that are ready to be in effect on October 1, the fiscal year, and they didn't. Now, that's not unique to this particular Congress, but it explains why we are here. Why was there a decision to violate this statutory calendar and not, frankly, even get to a serious consideration of the budget till January, the fourth month of the fiscal year? Well, it's because the majority decided that the priority of the budget was a low priority. Instead of working on the budget and appropriations bills, what the majority wanted to work on for the first 9 months of the year was the ineffective and ultimately failed effort to repeal the Affordable Care Act. That took us into late September, essentially a week before the start of the fiscal year. The repeal of the Affordable Care Act was more important, was a higher priority than getting a budget done to fund governmental services. When that effort was done, did the majority then race to do a budget and do appropriations? No. They then took the next 3 months, now into the new fiscal year with no budget, to do tax cuts. And eventually, before December, were able to pass a tax cut bill. Finally, the majority has turned to this issue of the budget and the urgency of the budget in January, in the fourth month of the fiscal year. And they're using a gimmick, again, that both parties have used, continuing resolution, to evade the responsibility of actually doing a budget. The R's, when they were focusing on other things, and they didn't want to focus on the budget because it was about tax cuts and repealing the Affordable Care Act, said, we can't do it by October 1, give us till December 8. And then they said, give us till December 22nd. And then they said, give us till January 19th. The Democratic minorities reluctantly agreed, but it was the Republicans who said, we want to push this budget back. Nearly 2 weeks ago, Mr. President, there was a very important meeting that frankly has not occurred in my time in the Senate. It was a request by our Secretary of Defense, Secretary James Mattis, to come and speak to the caucus lunches. I've been here since January of 2013. That has not happened before. He came, I believe it was on the 8th of January, a Tuesday, to speak to both the Democratic and Republican caucuses. I know what he told us, and because I know the honor of Secretary Mattis, I'm sure he said the same thing to the Republicans. And what he said is, don't give me another continuing resolution. He told us, as he has repeatedly testified, and as others have testified, that continuing resolutions are destroying the military. They're destroying our readiness. They're destroying our capacity to meet the threats of today. He said, don't continue this continuing resolution mania. Give me a full year budget. Give me a full year budget. And so when the Republican majority proposed yet another continuing resolution till February 19, with no commitment about actually finding a budget deal, many of us, both Democrats and Republicans, said we would no longer support the continuing resolution gimmick, and we wanted to move expeditiously toward a full budget deal. I think this is very important because, again, this is President Trump's Secretary of Defense saying, do not give me a continuing resolution. Let's find a full budget deal. As my colleague Senator McCain said in a written statement the other night, a shutdown is bad and a continuing resolution is bad. We need to move forward to find a full budget deal. It was interesting that even as we were here Thursday night and the House was passing a continuing resolution to put it on the table here, the Department of Defense, the Pentagon's chief spokesperson, was tweeting out, "Stop! Don't do another continuing resolution. This is wasteful. It is hurting the military. Work toward a full budget deal." That is the position of the Department of Defense in the Trump administration, that this CR is actually a bad thing. And that's where we're here, because we didn't heed the advice of the Secretary of Defense. We delayed consideration of the budget until well into the fiscal year, and we're here for another reason. We're here because President Trump announced in September that he's terminating legal protections for hundreds of thousands of Dreamers. It was interesting the other night, the majority leader repeatedly called these Dreamers illegal immigrants. They're not illegal. They are here protected by a presidential executive order that's been upheld in courts. They are legal. President Trump is threatening to take away their legal status and make them illegal, but when the majority leader stands here and calls Dreamers illegal immigrants, it really shows you the contempt with which he holds these young people. To call people who have a legal protection illegal immigrants, as he has done and as the president has done, is deeply offensive. But the president's threat to end their legal status on March 5 creates a huge hardship for them and is a matter of real urgency. When the House passed the continuing resolution Thursday night, we asked the majority for a vote. We said, let's vote right now to defeat the continuing resolution because the votes aren't here. Even Republicans will vote against it. The Pentagon was tweeting out asking, basically telling us the CR was unacceptable. And we asked for that vote Thursday night so we would have the full day of Friday to find a compromise and keep the government open. But the majority wouldn't let us vote Thursday night. They wouldn't let us vote and then find Friday as the day to find a compromise to keep the government open. Instead, they postponed the vote until 10 o'clock Friday, thinking that would pressure people. But it failed, as we knew that it would. And when my Democratic colleagues stood on the floor twice and asked for short-term ability to keep the government open and keep negotiating, the majority objected. And so the government closed down as the majority objected to those short-term agreements. Why did the majority object to keeping us open over the weekend while we debated? That's a question for them to answer, but I have a surmise. My surmise is that they're okay with the shutdown. I'm only aware of two people who think shutdown is good. In Virginia, we don't think it's good. Our military doesn't think it's good. Our federal employees don't think it's good. Those receiving Social Security disability checks don't think it's good. Virginians don't think it's a good thing. But I can find two people who think shutdown is a good thing. President Trump, in a tweet on the 2nd of May, 2017, basically said, our country needs a good shutdown in September to fix this mess. Well, he didn't get exactly what he wanted. He didn't get a shutdown in September. But can you imagine the mindset of somebody basically saying that a shutdown is a good thing? This president, it's President Trump, who uniquely says, and he's the only person I know who has said it, that a shutdown is a good thing. And he actually tweeted out something similar yesterday. He said, on my one-year anniversary, this shutdown has given me a, quote, nice anniversary present. That's what he tweeted out yesterday. So we have President Trump on the record saying a shutdown is a good thing and it's a nice present. I have found one other person who has said a shutdown is a good thing. I think it was on Friday, actually, where the Republican director of the Office of Management and Budget was on a radio show hosted by Sean Hannity. And this is a direct quote from Mick Mulvaney, director of the Office of Management and Budget. Quote, in fact, I found out for the first time last night that the person who technically shuts the government down is me, which is kind of cool. The person who technically shuts the government down is me, which is kind of cool. The reason we on this side are referring to this as the Trump shutdown is because it's only President Trump who has said the shutdown is good. It's only his Office of Management and Budget Director who says it's cool to shut the government down. And when we offered to our Republican colleagues to avert the shutdown Friday night, they objected to it. They objected to it. So here we are. We need to follow the advice of the Secretary of Defense and reopen government and commit to finding not another continuing resolution, but a full budget deal. A full budget deal that deals with all of our priorities, whether it be emergency relief in Texas or chip reauthorization or education or defense financing. That's what Secretary Mattis has asked us to do, and that's what we need to do. And we must also deal with the emergency created by President Trump with his threat to take legal children and deprive them of their legal status on March 5. And so, for that reason, Mr. President, I would like to ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar item 36, which is H.R. 1301, that the Schumer amendment that would provide for a continuing resolution to fund the government through Tuesday, January 23rd, 2018, which is at the desk, be the only amendment in order to the bill, that there be 1 hour of debate equally divided between the two leaders considered and agreed to, the bill as amended be considered and read a third time and passed, and that the motions to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
The majority whip.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object, shutting down the government only to fund it for 3 days at a time afterwards isn't how this place is supposed to work, and it certainly isn't what the American people deserve. We'll soon vote to reopen the federal government for 3 weeks, where we'll have time to discuss spending caps and how to move forward on the DACA recipients. If our Democratic colleagues are ready to end this needless shutdown, then let's have the vote right now and open the government so we can begin discussions on bipartisan priorities. So, Mr. President, I would ask unanimous consent that the senator's request be amended and that unanimous consent be given, notwithstanding Rule 22, that the Senate immediately vote on the motion and vote cloture on the motion to concur with the amendment, which funds CHIP and reopens the government, and further that if cloture is invoked, all post-cloture time be considered expired, and the Senate immediately vote on the motion to concur with further amendment.
Does the senator from Virginia so modify his request?
I do not modify my request because this is a vote that has been noticed for later in the evening, and the colleagues who would be asked to vote on it are not here, so I do not agree to modify my request.
Is there objection to the